The balloons swayed gently from the ceiling, pastel pink and white, tied with delicate ribbons that caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows. The living room in Clearwater Heights, Arizona, had been transformed into something magical. Tables draped in cream-colored linen held towers of cupcakes decorated with tiny fondant baby shoes. Friends and family gathered in clusters, their laughter mixing with the soft melody of background music. At the center of it all sat a woman in a flowing white maternity dress, her hand resting protectively on her rounded belly, a genuine smile lighting up her face for what felt like the first time in years. The shower was perfect. Too perfect, perhaps. The kind of moment that made you forget, just for a second, that life had ever been anything but beautiful. Then the front door opened. No knock. No announcement. Just the slow, deliberate creak of hinges that made every conversation in the room die, like someone had flipped a switch. Heads turned. The pregnant woman's smile froze on her lips, her fingers instinctively tightening on the arm of her chair. A man stood in the doorway, dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people in that room made in a month. His presence filled the space like smoke, suffocating and wrong. He wasn't supposed to be there. Everyone knew it. But he stepped inside anyway, his shoes clicking against the hardwood floor with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. His eyes locked onto hers across the crowded room, and in that moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. The woman's breath caught in her throat. Her hand moved from her belly to grip the armrest, knuckles turning white. Someone near the back of the room whispered something, but the words were lost in the tension that had suddenly turned the air thick and heavy. He smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not even a polite one. It was the kind of smile that said he knew exactly what he was doing, and he was going to enjoy every second of it. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy educational stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand what happened in that room, what was about to unfold in front of 27 witnesses with their phones ready to capture every moment, we need to go back. Back to when that woman believed in fairy tales. Back to when she thought love was supposed to hurt a little. Back to when she didn't know the difference between sacrifice and self-destruction. She thought the worst part of her life was over. She was wrong. Her name was Evelyn Parker, though everyone who knew her well just called her Ev. She was 34 years old when this story truly began, though the seeds of it had been planted years earlier. Evelyn worked as a respiratory therapist at Clearwater Regional Medical Center, the kind of job that required equal parts technical skill and emotional fortitude. She was the person families called when their loved ones couldn't breathe, when panic filled hospital rooms, and someone needed to stay calm enough to save a life. Her colleagues described her as gentle, the kind of gentle that came from genuine empathy rather than weakness. She remembered patients' names long after they'd been discharged. She stayed late when someone needed her, even when her shift had ended hours ago. Dependable. That was the word that came up most often when people talked about Evelyn. She was the friend who showed up when you called at 2 in the morning. The daughter who visited her aging mother every Sunday without fail. The coworker who covered shifts without complaint when someone's child got sick. She believed in showing up, in keeping promises, in the kind of loyalty that seemed increasingly rare in a world that moved too fast and cared too little. But there was something else about Evelyn that not everyone saw. Beneath that gentle exterior was a woman who had learned to make herself smaller. To apologize for taking up space. To second-guess her own instincts even when they screamed at her that something was wrong. It hadn't always been that way. There were photographs from her early 20s where her smile reached all the way to her eyes, where her posture suggested confidence rather than careful self-protection. Somewhere along the way, something had changed. Someone had changed her. Evelyn didn't always live in peace. That was the polite way to put it, the way her therapist would phrase it years later when they finally started unpacking the damage. The truth was messier, uglier, harder to summarize in a single sentence that didn't make people uncomfortable. The truth was that Evelyn had survived something that left scars no one could see, the kind that didn't show up in emergency rooms, but were just as capable of destroying a life. 8 years earlier, Evelyn had met Marcus Reed at a coffee shop in downtown Phoenix. Not the cute, destined to be together kind of meeting that romantic comedies were built on, but the mundane, Ordinary kind, where she was waiting for her order, and he struck up a conversation about the weather. Marcus was 29 at the time, charming in the effortless way that some men were, the kind of charm that made you feel like you were the only person in the room, even when you weren't. He had dark eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and he smiled often, especially when he wanted something. He was broke. That was clear from the start. Not in a temporary, between jobs kind of way, but in a deeper, more fundamental sense. Marcus had big dreams, the kind that required other people's money and patience to achieve. He wanted to start his own consulting firm, something vague involving finance and helping small businesses grow. He talked about it constantly, painting pictures of the future with such vivid detail that you could almost see it. A corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows. A name on the door. Clients lined up waiting for his expertise. He just needed time. He just needed support. He just needed someone to believe in him. Evelyn believed in him. That was her first mistake, though she wouldn't understand that for years. She supported him emotionally, listening to his ideas for hours after she got home from 12-hour shifts, her feet aching and her mind exhausted, but still present, still encouraging. She supported him financially too, though Marcus never framed it that way. It was always just temporary. Just until the business got off the ground. Just until the next deal closed. She paid the rent on their small apartment. She bought the groceries. She covered the utilities and the car insurance and the hundreds of small expenses that added up to thousands of dollars over time. Evelyn worked double shifts at the hospital, her schedule a brutal rotation of days and nights that left her perpetually tired but never quite able to catch up on sleep. Meanwhile, Marcus hustled. That was his word for it. Hustling. He took meetings that never seemed to materialize into actual jobs. He made connections that never turned into partnerships. He talked a lot about strategy and networking and playing the long game. But at the end of each month, Evelyn was still the only one with a paycheck. It should have bothered her more than it did. Looking back, she could see that clearly. But at the time, it felt like love. It felt like partnership. It felt like what you did when you believed in someone's potential, even when the rest of the world couldn't see it yet. The red flags started small, so small that Evelyn almost missed them entirely. Marcus had always been confident, but somewhere around the end of their first year together, that confidence started to curdle into something else. He began making comments about her job, little throwaway lines that seemed harmless on the surface, but left tiny cuts that stung more than they should have. "It's just temporary," he said one night, when she came home exhausted from a particularly difficult shift where they'd lost a patient despite everyone's best efforts. "Once my business takes off, you won't have to work like this anymore." She'd looked at him, confused. "I like my job." "Yeah, but it's not exactly a career, is it? I mean, you're helping people, that's great, but it's not like you're building something." Evelyn had felt something twist in her chest, a defensive instinct that she immediately pushed down. He didn't mean it the way it sounded. He was just stressed about money. He was just frustrated with how long things were taking. She was being too sensitive. That phrase became a constant refrain. Too sensitive. She heard it when she tried to talk about feeling lonely because he was always out networking. Too sensitive when she mentioned that it hurt that he'd forgotten their anniversary. Too sensitive when she asked why he'd snapped at her in front of his friends. "You're too sensitive, Ev. That's your problem. You take everything so personally." And she started to believe him. Started to wonder if maybe she was the problem. If maybe her expectations were unreasonable. If maybe love was supposed to feel like walking on eggshells, carefully measuring every word before you spoke it, anxiously scanning his face for signs of irritation or disappointment. The gaslighting was subtle at first, woven into conversations so smoothly that Evelyn didn't recognize it as a pattern until much later. Marcus would say something cruel, then deny he'd said it at all. He'd make plans, and then change them without telling her, then act like she was crazy for being confused. He'd promise to be home for dinner and show up 4 hours late, then get angry at her for being upset about it. "I wouldn't act this way if you believed in me," he said during one particularly brutal argument. "I'm out there trying to build a future for us, and all you do is complain about how I'm not around enough. Do you have any idea how much pressure I'm under?" Evelyn internalized the blame. She stopped mentioning when she was hurt. She stopped asking where he'd been. She stopped expecting anything beyond the bare minimum, and then felt grateful when he occasionally exceeded that impossibly low bar. She became an expert at making excuses for him, to herself and to the people around her who were starting to notice that something was off. 3 years into their relationship, something shifted. Marcus's consulting firm, which had existed more in theory than in practice for so long, suddenly gained traction. A connection he'd made through a former college roommate turned into a real contract. Then another. Then 3 more in quick succession. Money started coming in, not in the trickle Evelyn had grown accustomed to, but in steady, substantial streams that changed everything about their financial situation practically overnight. Marcus bought new clothes, expensive ones from stores Evelyn had only window shopped at before. Tailored suits that fit him perfectly. Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than her monthly student loan payment. He started getting his hair cut at an upscale salon instead of the budget place they'd used before. His phone rang constantly with calls from clients, from potential investors, from people who wanted his time and attention. The apartment they'd lived in for years suddenly wasn't good enough anymore, and they moved to a high-rise condo in downtown Phoenix with views that stretched for miles. Evelyn should have been happy. This was what they'd worked toward, what she'd sacrificed for, what had justified all those double shifts and skipped meals and postponed dreams. But instead of bringing them closer together, Marcus's success created a distance between them that grew wider with each passing week. He was busy now, legitimately busy in ways he'd never been before. Business dinners that ran late into the night. Weekend golf outings with clients. Conferences in other cities that took him away for days at a time. She became invisible in her own life. That was the only way to describe it. When Marcus came home, he walked past her like she was furniture, his attention glued to his phone as he fired off emails and text messages. When she tried to tell him about her day, he'd nod absently, clearly not listening, clearly somewhere else entirely. When she suggested they spend time together, maybe go out to dinner or watch a movie like they used to, he'd sigh like she'd asked him to move mountains. "I'm exhausted, Ev. I've been working all day. Can't you just be supportive instead of needy?" Needy. Another word that got added to her internal vocabulary of things she was apparently being too much of. Too sensitive, too needy, too demanding, too emotional, too everything except the right thing at the right time in the right way. Evelyn's 32nd birthday came and went without acknowledgement. She'd mentioned it a week before, casually, not wanting to make a big deal out of it, but hoping he'd remember. The day arrived, and Marcus was gone before she woke up, off to a meeting he'd scheduled months ago that he apparently couldn't reschedule. She went to work as usual, smiled when her colleagues brought in cupcakes and sang off-key in the break room, then came home to an empty condo that felt more like a hotel than a home. He texted around 10 that night. "Got held up. Don't wait up." She'd sat on their expensive couch in their expensive condo and cried alone, feeling ridiculous for caring so much about a birthday, for wanting something as simple as acknowledgement, for still hoping that this man she'd given years of her life to might remember that she existed as more than just the person who used to pay his bills. The medical incident happened 3 months later. Evelyn had been experiencing severe abdominal pain for weeks, the kind that woke her up at night and made it hard to focus during shifts. She'd ignored it as long as she could, the way medical professionals often did when it came to their own health, but eventually, the pain became impossible to dismiss. Tests revealed a cyst on her ovary that needed to be removed surgically. Not life-threatening, but not insignificant either. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, with an expected hospital stay of 2 nights for observation and recovery. Marcus drove her to the hospital the morning of the procedure. He seemed distracted, checking his phone repeatedly in the pre-op room while Evelyn tried to calm the anxiety that made her hands shake as nurses prepped her for surgery. When they came to wheel her back to the operating room, he'd kissed her forehead quickly, already halfway to the door. "You'll be fine," he said. "I'll be here when you wake up." He wasn't. When Evelyn came out of anesthesia, groggy and in pain, the chair beside her hospital bed was empty. She asked the nurse if anyone had been there, and the nurse shook her head with an expression that suggested she'd seen this before, this particular brand of abandonment. Evelyn reached for her phone with hands that still trembled from the anesthesia and called Marcus. It went straight to voicemail. She spent that day alone. And the next. Nurses came and went, checking her vitals and her incision, making small talk that couldn't quite fill the space where someone who loved her should have been. Her mother came to visit, bringing flowers and staying as long as the hospital would allow, but she lived 2 hours away and couldn't take time off work to be there constantly. Coworkers stopped by during shift changes, bringing magazines and offering to grab her anything she needed from the cafeteria. But Marcus didn't come, didn't call, didn't text. When he finally picked her up for discharge 3 days later, he acted like nothing was wrong. Like it was completely normal to abandon your partner during surgery and recovery. When Evelyn finally worked up the courage to ask where he'd been, his response was delivered with an irritation that suggested she was the one being unreasonable for expecting his presence. I had to fly to Dallas. A major client needed me. What was I supposed to do, Ev? Tell them no because you were having a routine procedure? This is my career we're talking about. You said you'd be there when I woke up. And I would have been if the timing had worked out. But it didn't. I can't control everything. You're fine now, aren't you? Everything worked out. She wanted to scream at him that fine wasn't the same as okay, that being physically recovered didn't erase the emotional devastation of waking up alone and spending 3 days wondering why the person who was supposed to love her couldn't be bothered to show up. But she didn't scream. She'd learned by then that expressing hurt only made things worse, only gave him ammunition to use against her later, only proved that she was too emotional, too needy, too sensitive to understand the demands of the real world. So she stayed quiet and internalized another wound that wouldn't heal properly. The affair rumors started circulating about 6 months after that. Whispers at first, the kind of thing Evelyn could almost ignore if she tried hard enough. A former colleague mentioned seeing Marcus at an expensive restaurant with a woman who definitely wasn't Evelyn. A neighbor in their building made a comment about hearing laughter from their condo one afternoon when Evelyn had been at work and Marcus was supposedly traveling for business. Small things that added up to a picture Evelyn didn't want to see. She confronted him on a Saturday morning when he was packing for yet another business trip. Her hands shook as she forced the words out, hating how weak her voice sounded, hating that she was even in the position of having to ask, "Are you seeing someone else?" Marcus looked up from his suitcase, and for a split second, something flashed across his face. Not guilt exactly, but a calculation, a quick assessment of how much he needed to deny versus how much he could admit. Then he laughed. Actually laughed, like she'd told a joke instead of asked a question that was tearing her apart from the inside. Jesus Christ, Ev. Are you serious right now? This is what you're worried about? I'm out there building an empire, working my ass off, and you're sitting here inventing problems because you're bored or insecure or whatever the hell this is. Someone saw you at. I have business dinners. I meet with clients. I network. That's how this works. That's how I went from broke to successful. Or would you prefer I went back to being the guy you had to support? Is that what you want? Because I can stop working so hard if that would make you feel more secure. The conversation spiraled from there, Marcus's voice rising with each accusation, each deflection, each attempt to make Evelyn feel crazy for trusting her own instincts. By the end of it, she was apologizing to him, actually apologizing for questioning him, for doubting him, for letting her insecurities damage their relationship. He left for his trip without saying goodbye, and Evelyn sat in their expensive condo feeling like she was suffocating. But the rumors didn't stop. They intensified. More sightings. More whispers. A friend of a friend who worked at a hotel mentioned seeing Marcus check in with a woman, both of them laughing, his hand on the small of her back in a way that suggested intimacy beyond professional courtesy. The woman had a social media presence, thousands of followers who watched her carefully curated life of luxury travel and designer handbags. Her name was Lena Cross, and when Evelyn finally worked up the nerve to look at her Instagram profile, the evidence was right there for anyone who cared to see it. Photos from restaurants Evelyn recognized. Landmarks in cities Marcus had supposedly traveled to alone for business. A selfie taken in what looked suspiciously like their building's lobby, though Lena had geotagged it vaguely as Phoenix, without specifying exactly where. Marcus wasn't in any of the photos, but Evelyn didn't need him to be. She knew. The way you know something in your bones, even when you can't prove it in a way that would hold up in court. She confronted him again, this time with screenshots, with specifics, with evidence she'd spent hours compiling while her heart broke over and over with each new discovery. And this time, Marcus didn't laugh. He got quiet, a dangerous kind of quiet that made the air feel heavy and threatening. You've been stalking my client's social media? Are you out of your mind? She's not just a client, Marcus. Don't insult my intelligence. You're right, he said, and for one brief, horrible moment, Evelyn thought he might actually tell the truth. She's not just a client. She's someone who appreciates what I've accomplished. Someone who doesn't spend all her time trying to make me feel guilty for being successful. Someone who actually makes me happy. The words landed like physical blows. Evelyn felt her legs weaken, felt the room tilt slightly, felt something fundamental crack inside her chest. You're having an affair. I'm living my life, Marcus corrected, his tone cold, detached, like he was discussing a business transaction rather than the destruction of their relationship. You should be grateful I stayed this long, honestly. Most guys would have left years ago. You're clingy, you're exhausting, and you make everything about you when I'm the one actually doing something with my life. He left that night, just packed a bag and walked out, and Evelyn was too shocked to try to stop him. She stood in the middle of their living room for what felt like hours, her mind trying to process what had just happened, trying to reconcile the man who'd just spoken those words with the man she'd fallen in love with years ago, trying to understand how she'd become the villain in the story of her own life. The divorce was brutal in ways that went beyond legal proceedings and asset division. Marcus didn't just leave. He waged a campaign designed to break whatever was left of Evelyn after years of systematic emotional dismantling. He hired an expensive attorney, the kind whose hourly rate exceeded what Evelyn made in a day, and used his newfound wealth as a weapon. Every negotiation became a battlefield. Every conversation through lawyers was laced with threats and intimidation tactics that had nothing to do with fair settlement and everything to do with making Evelyn suffer for having the audacity to exist. He wanted the condo, even though Evelyn had paid the rent on their previous apartments for years while he built his business. He wanted her to sign documents acknowledging that she'd contributed nothing to his success, that every dollar he'd earned was his alone, never mind the thousands she'd poured into keeping him afloat when he had nothing. His lawyers sent letter after letter, each one more aggressive than the last, each one suggesting that if Evelyn didn't agree to their terms, things would get much worse for her. Evelyn couldn't afford a lawyer like his. She found someone who worked on a sliding scale, a kind woman in her 50s who did her best, but was clearly outmatched by Marcus's legal team. Every hearing felt like a performance where the script had been written in advance, and Evelyn's role was to lose gracefully, while Marcus played the victim of a gold-digging ex who was trying to steal his hard-earned money. The friends they'd shared, the couples they'd had dinner parties with, the people Evelyn had thought would support her through this nightmare, started disappearing one by one. Some of them were blunt about it, choosing Marcus's side because he was the one with money and connections now, because aligning with him offered more social and professional benefits than loyalty to Evelyn ever could. Others were more subtle, slowly fading out with excuses about being too busy or not wanting to get involved in drama, as if Evelyn had chosen any of this, as if she'd asked to have her life destroyed for entertainment value. I just think it's better if we stay neutral, one former friend said over coffee, not quite meeting Evelyn's eyes. We care about both of you, and taking sides would just make things messy. But neutrality, Evelyn was learning, was just another way of choosing the person with power. Nobody stayed neutral when they had to pick which birthday party to attend or which holiday gathering to prioritize. They chose Marcus. They chose his parties in his expensive condo with his expensive wine and his new girlfriend who laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. And Evelyn sat alone in a small apartment she'd moved to after losing the condo, trying to understand how her entire social circle had evaporated like it had never existed at all. The psychological collapse didn't happen all at once. It built slowly, a cascade of symptoms that Evelyn tried to ignore until she couldn't anymore. The panic attacks started first, hitting her at random moments throughout the day. She'd be in the middle of treating a patient, focused and competent, and suddenly her heart would start racing, her chest tightening until she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except excuse herself and lock herself in a supply closet until the attack passed. Sleep became impossible. She'd lie awake for hours, her mind replaying every conversation with Marcus, every moment where she should have seen the red flags, every decision that had led her to this place. When she finally did fall asleep, nightmares woke her gasping and sweating, dreams where she was trapped in rooms with no exits, where she was screaming but no sound came out, where Marcus stood over her laughing while she drowned. She lost weight, not in a healthy way, but in the way that happens when food loses all appeal and eating feels like a chore your body no longer has energy for. Her coworkers noticed, expressed concern in the gentle way that medical professionals did when they recognized symptoms in their own. Her mother called more frequently, worried about the hollow quality in Evelyn's voice, the way she seemed to be disappearing into herself piece by piece. 6 months after Marcus left, Evelyn's supervisor sat her down in a private office and suggested, very carefully, that it might be time to talk to someone. Not as a judgment, not as a requirement, but as someone who'd seen this before, who understood that trauma didn't always come from single catastrophic events but could accumulate over years until it crushed you under its weight. "I'm fine," Evelyn had said automatically, the response so ingrained she didn't even have to think about it. "You're not," her supervisor replied, not unkindly. "And that's okay. But you need help, Ev, before this becomes something you can't come back from." The therapy session started awkwardly. Evelyn sat in an office that tried too hard to be calming, with its soft lighting and comfortable chairs and abstract art that probably cost more than her rent, facing a therapist named Dr. Sarah Chun who had kind eyes and an unsettling ability to see through every defense mechanism Evelyn had spent years constructing. "Tell me about your marriage," Dr. Chun said during their first session. "It's over. That's really all there is to tell. Is it?" And somehow, with that simple question, something inside Evelyn cracked open. The words came tumbling out, years of pain and confusion and self-blame spilling across that carefully neutral office like water from a broken dam. She talked about the gaslighting, about how Marcus had convinced her that her own thoughts and feelings were invalid. She talked about the isolation, about losing herself piece by piece until she didn't recognize the woman in the mirror anymore. She talked about the hospital stay, about waking up alone and feeling like she deserved it somehow, like she hadn't earned the right to expect basic human decency. Dr. Chin listened without judgment, taking notes occasionally, asking questions that made Evelyn confront things she'd been avoiding for years. And slowly, painfully, Evelyn started to understand what had been done to her. She learned terms like emotional abuse, narcissistic manipulation, trauma bonding. She learned that what she'd experienced had a name, a pattern, a documented psychological framework that proved she wasn't crazy, wasn't too sensitive, wasn't the problem. "You survived something that destroys people," Dr. Chin told her during one session, several months into their work together. "Surviving is the hardest part. Now you get to learn how to live again." Living again felt impossible at first. Evelyn went through the motions, showing up for work and therapy and the basic functions that kept her alive, but everything felt muted, distant, like she was watching her own life through cloudy glass. She avoided situations where she might run into Marcus or anyone associated with him. She turned down invitations to social events, unable to face the possibility of small talk and fake smiles when everything inside her felt broken beyond repair. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. The panic attacks became less frequent. She started sleeping through occasional nights without nightmares. She began eating regular meals again, rediscovering tastes and textures that brought small moments of pleasure. She reconnected with a few old friends who hadn't chosen sides, who let her talk when she needed to and sat in silence with her when words felt like too much effort. 18 months after Marcus left, Evelyn was invited to a backyard cookout hosted by a co-worker named Jennifer. Her first instinct was to decline, to come up with some excuse that would let her stay home in the safety of her small apartment where nothing unexpected could hurt her. But Dr. Chun had been encouraging her to push against the isolation, to try rebuilding social connections even when it felt uncomfortable. So Evelyn said yes, bought a bottle of wine she couldn't really afford, and showed up at Jennifer's house on a Saturday afternoon with her stomach twisted in anxious knots. The backyard was full of people Evelyn didn't know, which somehow made it easier. No shared history, no knowing looks, no whispered conversations about her failed marriage. She grabbed a soda from a cooler and found a chair in a quiet corner, content to observe rather than participate. People laughed and talked around her, the social dynamics flowing in ways that felt foreign after so long in isolation. That's when she noticed him, a man standing near the grill, talking to Jennifer's husband with an ease that suggested they knew each other well. He was tall, probably early 40s, with the kind of calm presence that drew attention without demanding it. He wore jeans and a simple t-shirt, his posture relaxed but somehow alert, like he was comfortable in the moment but aware of everything around him. When he laughed at something Jennifer's husband said, it was genuine, unreserved, the kind of laugh that came from actual joy rather than social performance. Jennifer appeared at Evelyn's side with a plate of food. "You should meet Caleb. He's one of the good ones." "I'm not really looking to meet anyone." "I didn't say you were. I just said you should meet him. He's in the National Guard, logistics sergeant. Known him for years. Trust me, after what you've been through, you deserve to remember what actual decent men look like." Before Evelyn could protest, Jennifer was waving Caleb over. He approached with a friendly smile, not the kind that felt like a performance or a prelude to something predatory, just a simple acknowledgement of another human being existing in the same space. "Caleb Hart," he said, extending his hand. "Jennifer tells me you're a respiratory therapist. That's got to be intense work." They talked for 3 hours that day. Not about anything profound or life-changing, just conversation that flowed naturally from one topic to another. Caleb asked questions and actually listened to the answers, his attention focused and genuine in a way that felt almost foreign to Evelyn after years of being treated like background noise in her own life. He talked about his work in the National Guard, about logistics and supply chains, and the satisfaction of solving complex organizational problems. He mentioned his family, aging parents he checked on regularly, a sister in Colorado he video called every Sunday. What struck Evelyn most was what he didn't do. He didn't interrupt her. He didn't make everything about himself. He didn't try to impress her with stories designed to make him look important or successful. He didn't ask for her number or suggest they get together sometime, with the kind of expectation that made refusal feel impossible. When the cookout was winding down and people were starting to leave, Caleb simply said it was nice meeting her and walked away, leaving Evelyn with a strange feeling she couldn't quite identify at first. Safety. That's what it was. She'd felt safe talking to him. They ran into each other again 3 weeks later at a grocery store. Evelyn was in the produce section, trying to decide between 2 types of apples that looked identical but were priced differently, when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "The Honeycrisp are worth the extra money. Trust me on that." She turned to find Caleb standing there with a shopping basket that contained the kind of practical items that suggested he actually cooked for himself. Chicken breast, fresh vegetables, whole grain bread. He smiled when he saw her face register recognition. "Evelyn, right? From Jennifer's cookout." They talked while shopping, their carts moving through the aisles in a kind of synchronized randomness. When they both ended up in the checkout line at the same time, Caleb asked if she'd like to grab coffee sometime. Not dinner, not drinks, not any of the high-pressure situations that could be misconstrued as dates. Just coffee, just conversation. "Only if you want to," he added quickly. "No pressure either way. I enjoyed talking to you, and I thought it might be nice to do it again. But if you're not interested, that's completely fine." The fact that he gave her an out, that he made it explicitly clear she could say no without consequence, made Evelyn want to say yes. They met for coffee the following Saturday at a quiet place near Evelyn's apartment. Caleb arrived exactly on time, not the fashionably late that Marcus had always operated on, not the power move of making someone wait to establish dominance. Just on time, respectful of her schedule and her presence. They talked for 2 hours, and when Evelyn mentioned she was in therapy, working through some difficult experiences from her past, Caleb didn't flinch or change the subject or make it weird. "That takes courage," he said. "Facing that stuff instead of just pushing it down. A lot of people never do the work." "You've been to therapy?" "After my second deployment. I came back different, and I didn't like who I was becoming. The Guard has good mental health resources, and I used them. Best decision I ever made. It became a pattern after that. Coffee once a week, then twice a week, then casual dinners where they'd split the check and talk about everything and nothing." Caleb never pushed for more. Never made Evelyn feel like there was an agenda behind his interest. He respected boundaries she didn't even know she was setting, reading her comfort level with an awareness that felt almost intuitive. 6 months into their friendship, Evelyn had a panic attack in public. They were at a farmer's market, browsing vendors and trying samples, when she saw someone who looked like Marcus from behind. It wasn't him, just a stranger who happened to have similar hair and build, but the resemblance triggered something primal in Evelyn's nervous system. Her chest tightened. Her vision narrowed. Her hands started shaking so badly, she dropped the bag she was carrying. Caleb noticed immediately. He didn't make a scene, didn't draw attention, just gently guided her to a quieter area away from the crowd. He didn't tell her to calm down or breathe or any of the well-meaning but useless things people often said during panic attacks. He just sat with her, his presence steady and calm, letting her work through it at her own pace. When she could finally speak again, voice trembling and embarrassed, he just handed her a bottle of water and said, "You're okay. Take your time." That night, Evelyn told him about Marcus. Not everything, not the worst parts, but enough to give context to her reaction. Caleb listened without interrupting, without offering solutions or trying to fix anything, without making it about him or his opinions on what she should have done differently. "Thank you for telling me," he said when she finished. "And I'm sorry you went through that. Nobody deserves that. I should be over it by now." Says who? Trauma doesn't follow a schedule, Ev. You're healing at exactly the pace you need to heal. It was the way he said her name, the shortened version that only close friends used, that made something shift in Evelyn's chest. She realized she'd fallen in love with him without meaning to, without even noticing it happening. It wasn't the dramatic, all-consuming passion that romance novels sold as ideal. It was quieter than that, steadier, built on foundations of respect and safety and genuine care. They started officially dating a month later. Caleb asked if he could kiss her after walking her home from dinner, actually asked instead of just assuming, giving her the power to say yes or no. Their relationship developed at a pace that felt right for both of them. No rushing, no pressure, no expectations beyond mutual respect and honesty. When they finally slept together for the first time, it was because they both wanted to, and Caleb checked in with her throughout to make sure she was comfortable, that everything was okay. Evelyn had forgotten that intimacy could feel like that. Like partnership instead of performance. Like safety instead of obligation. They got married at the courthouse 2 years after they met. A simple ceremony with just a few close friends and family members. Nothing like the elaborate wedding Evelyn had imagined in her 20s before reality taught her that big ceremonies didn't guarantee lasting love. Jennifer and her husband were there. Evelyn's mother cried happy tears. Caleb's sister flew in from Colorado with her family. It was small and perfect and real in ways that had nothing to do with flowers or venues or Instagram-worthy moments. When Evelyn found out she was pregnant 4 months later, the news hit her with a complexity of emotions she hadn't anticipated. Joy, certainly, at the idea of creating a life with someone who actually loved and respected her. But also fear, deep and primal, at the vulnerability of bringing a child into a world where Marcus still existed, where her past could still somehow reach out and hurt her. "We don't have to tell anyone yet," Caleb said when she expressed her anxiety about Marcus finding out. "Not until you're ready. This is your pregnancy, your body, your choice about who gets to be part of it." They kept it quiet for as long as they could. Evelyn wore loose clothing to work, deflecting curious questions from coworkers who noticed she'd stopped drinking coffee. She declined social invitations that might require explanation. She and Caleb talked about the future in whispers, planning in private, keeping their joy contained to protect it from contamination by the past. But secrets were hard to keep in a connected world, especially when mutual acquaintances still linked Evelyn's old life to her new one. 6 months into the pregnancy, when Evelyn was finally starting to show in ways that couldn't be hidden, a former colleague ran into her at a medical supply store. The woman squealed with delight at the visible baby bump, asking a dozen questions in rapid succession, promising to spread the good news to everyone at the old hospital where Evelyn used to work before transferring to a different facility to start fresh. 2 days later, Marcus messaged her on social media. The first contact they'd had in over 3 years. Just 3 words that made Evelyn's blood run cold. "Congratulations on everything." She blocked him immediately, her hands shaking as she showed Caleb the message. They discussed options, considered getting a restraining order even though Marcus hadn't technically threatened her, decided to just stay vigilant and hope he'd lose interest. Marcus had Lena now, a whole new life that presumably kept him busy. Surely he'd moved on. Surely he didn't care enough about Evelyn anymore to cause problems. But Marcus had always been about control, about winning, about making sure that anything he'd once possessed couldn't be happy without him. And Evelyn's happiness, so visible now in her pregnancy and new marriage, was an affront to the narrative he'd constructed about himself as the victim of her inadequacy. He started following her social media again from a new account she didn't recognize at first. Liked old photos from years ago, making his presence known in subtle ways. He showed up at the hospital where she worked, claiming he was visiting a sick relative, though no one on staff could confirm anyone by that name. The security footage showed him lingering near the parking lot where Evelyn's car was parked, not doing anything explicitly threatening but there, always there, a reminder that he could reach her if he wanted to. Evelyn reported each incident, documenting everything with screenshots and dates and times. But Marcus was careful, always staying just on the acceptable side of the line that separated creepy from illegal. The police couldn't do much beyond file reports and suggest she be cautious. A restraining order required proof of harassment or threat, and "I'm worried about my ex's intentions" didn't meet the legal threshold. The stress affected her pregnancy. Her blood pressure climbed. She started having contractions early, false labor that landed her in the hospital for monitoring. Her doctor prescribed bed rest for the last month, concerned about preterm delivery. Caleb took family leave from the guard, staying home to take care of Evelyn, making sure she rested, handling household tasks, doing everything he could to reduce her stress even as Marcus's shadow loomed larger. Friends rallied around them, determined to throw Evelyn the baby shower she deserved despite everything. Jennifer organized it, insisting that Evelyn needed this, needed to be celebrated, needed to claim her joy publicly instead of letting fear keep her hidden. Caleb was hesitant, worried about Marcus showing up, but Evelyn surprised herself by agreeing. "I'm tired of hiding," she told him. "I'm tired of letting him take things from me. This is my baby, our baby, and I deserve to celebrate that." The shower was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon at Jennifer's house. Evelyn picked out a white maternity dress that made her feel beautiful for the first time in months. She practiced smiling in the mirror, reminding herself that she was allowed to be happy, that she'd earned this after everything she'd survived. The morning of the shower, she woke up with a sense of unease she couldn't explain. Just a feeling, a whisper of intuition that something was wrong. Caleb had to work an unexpected shift, some emergency with guard logistics that couldn't wait. He'd hated leaving her, had tried to get someone to cover for him, but Evelyn had insisted she'd be fine. Jennifer would be there. All their friends would be there. It was just a few hours. What could possibly happen? She arrived at Jennifer's house to find everything perfect. Balloons, decorations, tables laden with food and gifts. 27 people had shown up to celebrate, faces full of love and excitement. Evelyn sat in the designated chair, her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter kick as if responding to all the positive energy in the room. For the first time in so long, she felt truly happy, truly safe. Then the front door opened, and Marcus Reed stepped inside like he'd been invited, like he had every right to be there, like the past 3 years of separation and healing and restraining order attempts meant nothing at all. His suit was expensive, his hair perfectly styled, his smile sharp enough to cut. He locked eyes with Evelyn across the crowded room, and in that moment, she knew. This was why she'd felt uneasy. Some part of her had known he would find a way to destroy this too. The room went quiet in that particular way that happens when something is very wrong, but no one knows quite how to respond yet. Conversations died mid-sentence. Someone's laugh cut off abruptly. The music that had been playing softly in the background suddenly felt too loud, too cheerful, completely wrong for the tension that had just invaded the space like smoke. Marcus walked further into the room with the kind of confidence that suggested he owned it, that everyone there should be grateful for his presence. Several people looked to Jennifer, confused, because this man definitely wasn't on the guest list, and his arrival had the energy of an invasion rather than a visit. Jennifer moved toward him, her expression shifting from confusion to anger as recognition set in. "Marcus, you need to leave. Now. You weren't invited." "Funny," he said, not looking at Jennifer, his eyes still fixed on Evelyn. "I could have sworn I saw something about a celebration for my ex-wife on social media. Thought I'd drop by to offer my congratulations. That's not inappropriate, is it? Just being friendly." Evelyn couldn't move. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles went white. Her heart was racing, that familiar feeling of a panic attack starting to build in her chest, her breath coming shorter. She wanted to speak, to tell him to leave, to demand that he get out of this space that was supposed to be safe and happy, but her voice was trapped somewhere in her throat behind the fear. "You need to go," Jennifer repeated, louder this time. "Right now? Or I'm calling the police." "Relax," Marcus said, finally breaking eye contact with Evelyn to flash Jennifer his most charming smile, the one he used in business meetings when he needed to convince someone to trust him. I'm not here to cause problems. I just wanted to acknowledge this special moment. New husband, new baby, whole new life. Must be nice to just move on so easily, Ev. Some of us actually have to deal with the consequences of failed relationships instead of just replacing people like they're interchangeable. The words were designed to hurt, delivered with a casual cruelty that suggested he'd been practicing them. Someone near the back of the room pulled out their phone, already recording, sensing that whatever was about to happen was worth documenting. Marcus noticed and adjusted his stance slightly, playing to the camera now, to the audience that would eventually see this on social media. Actually, I brought a gift, he continued, reaching into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. For one terrible second, Evelyn's mind flashed to worst-case scenarios, to violence, to the kind of tragedy that ended up on evening news broadcasts. But what Marcus pulled out was worse in its own way. An envelope, expensive stationery, probably the same kind he used for business correspondence. It's a card, he explained, walking closer to Evelyn despite Jennifer trying to physically block his path. Just expressing my thoughts on this joyous occasion. I think everyone here should hear what I have to say. They should know what kind of person they're celebrating. Get out. Evelyn's voice finally worked, though it came out smaller than she wanted, shakier than she intended. Please, just leave. Oh, come on, Ev. Don't be rude. Not in front of all your friends. He opened the envelope, pulling out a card that probably cost more than everything else at the shower combined. Dear Evelyn, he read aloud, his voice taking on a mocking tone. Congratulations on your pregnancy. I hear you're very excited. I remember when you used to say you weren't ready for kids, back when we were together. Interesting how that changed when you found someone with a stable government job and benefits. Always knew you were practical about these things. The cruelty was calculated, designed to humiliate, to plant seeds of doubt in everyone's minds about Evelyn's motivations, about her character, about whether she was the victim she'd claimed to be or just a woman who'd traded up for better circumstances. Several people in the room shifted uncomfortably. A few looked away, not wanting to witness this, but not knowing how to intervene. Marcus wasn't finished. He put the card down on the gift table, deliberately placing it among the carefully wrapped presents and handmade cards from people who actually loved Evelyn. Then he picked up a glass of red wine from the drink table, holding it casually, swirling it like he was at a networking event rather than crashing a baby shower. You know what I think, he said, moving closer to Evelyn's chair. I think you owe me. Everything I became, everything I accomplished, it started when we were together. You were there for the beginning, and then you just left when things got successful, claimed I was abusive because I was focused on my career instead of babying you constantly. And now you're here, playing the victim, letting everyone think you're some kind of survivor when really you're just. He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, in a move that happened so quickly most people didn't register it until it was done, Marcus dumped the entire glass of red wine over Evelyn's head. The liquid soaked into her white maternity dress, splashed across her face, dripped down onto her pregnant belly in dark red stains that looked disturbingly like blood. The silence that followed was absolute. 27 people frozen in shock, phones recording, nobody quite believing what they'd just witnessed. Evelyn sat there, wine dripping from her hair, her dress ruined, her body trembling not just from the liquid, but from the violation of it. The public humiliation that Marcus had clearly planned and executed specifically to destroy this one moment of happiness. Then something inside her broke. Not in the way things had broken before, not in a way that led to collapse and panic. This was different. This was a final severing of whatever connection had kept her afraid of him, whatever power he'd held over her psyche for so many years. She looked up at Marcus, wine still dripping down her face, and saw him clearly for the first time. Not as the man she'd loved, not as the person she'd tried so hard to please, not even as the villain who destroyed her life. Just as a sad, pathetic man so desperate for control that he'd crashed a baby shower to pour wine on a pregnant woman. Get out, she said again, but this time her voice was steady, clear, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. You're pathetic, Marcus, and everyone here can see it. His expression shifted, the smug smile faltering for just a second, and in that moment Evelyn saw something she'd never seen before. Uncertainty. Fear that maybe, just maybe, this hadn't gone the way he'd planned. That maybe the audience he'd tried to play to wasn't buying his performance. Then the front door opened again, and Caleb Hart walked in wearing his National Guard uniform. He'd been on his way back from the emergency shift, had gotten Jennifer's frantic text that something was wrong, had driven faster than he probably should have to get there. He took in the scene in seconds. Evelyn soaked in wine, Marcus standing over her, phones recording, the tension in the room so thick you could cut it. Caleb's military training kicked in immediately. He didn't yell, didn't rush at Marcus, didn't do anything that could be construed as aggressive assault. He simply walked up to Marcus with the kind of calm authority that comes from years of dealing with actual crises, positioned himself between Marcus and Evelyn, and spoke in a voice that carried across the entire room. "Sir, you need to leave immediately. This is private property, and you're trespassing. The police have been called and are on their way." Marcus tried to maintain his confident stance, but something about Caleb's presence, about the uniform and the complete lack of fear, made him take a step back. "I was just leaving. Just came to give my congratulations. You assaulted my wife. In front of witnesses. With multiple people recording. I suggest you don't say another word until you have a lawyer present." The word, assaulted, seemed to wake Marcus up to the reality of his situation. His eyes darted around the room, taking in all the phones pointed at him, all the faces that had gone from shocked to disgusted, the evidence being compiled in real time that could and would be used against him. He opened his mouth, probably to try to spin it somehow, to make it seem less serious than it was, but sirens in the distance cut him off. "Officers will want to speak with you," Caleb continued, still calm, still positioned protectively in front of Evelyn. "I'd recommend you wait outside for them." Marcus looked at Evelyn one more time, and whatever he saw in her face made something in his expression crack. Maybe he realized that she wasn't broken anymore. Maybe he understood, finally, that he'd lost whatever power he'd once held over her. Or maybe he just recognized that he'd gone too far this time, that witnesses and video evidence and assault charges weren't things his lawyers could make disappear with money and intimidation. He walked out without another word, and the room exhaled collectively. The police arrived 3 minutes later. They found Marcus in the driveway, trying to get into his car, and detained him immediately. Inside the house, Evelyn sat wrapped in a blanket someone had found, wine slowly drying in her hair, while officers took statements from everyone present. 27 witnesses, all of them with the same story. Multiple videos from different angles, all showing the same deliberate assault. Marcus Reed had made it as easy as possible to arrest him. Caleb stayed at Evelyn's side the entire time, not hovering, not trying to speak for her, just there, solid and steady, his hand on her shoulder when she needed it. When the officer asked if she wanted to press charges, Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Yes, for everything. I want him prosecuted for all of it." The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks like dominoes falling. The video went viral immediately, spreading across social media faster than anyone could have anticipated. Marcus Reed, successful consultant, caught on camera assaulting his pregnant ex-wife at her baby shower. The internet was brutal, finding his business profiles, his social media, his professional reputation, and systematically destroying all of it. Investors pulled their money within days. Clients canceled contracts, citing moral clauses and public image concerns. The consulting firm that Marcus had built, that he'd sacrificed his marriage to create, began collapsing under the weight of his own actions. Lena Cross, his girlfriend, filed for divorce after her own social media followers flooded her comments with questions about why she was with someone capable of such cruelty. Marcus's carefully constructed image of success and respectability disintegrated in real time, broadcast for the world to see. The court case was straightforward. With that much evidence, Marcus's expensive lawyers couldn't do much beyond try to negotiate a plea deal. The judge sentenced him to 6 months in jail for assault, followed by 2 years of probation and a permanent restraining order that prohibited any contact with Evelyn or her family. The courtroom was packed the day of sentencing, journalists covering the case that had captured public attention, survivors of similar abuse sitting in solidarity with Evelyn. When the sentence was read, Evelyn felt something she hadn't expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, not even relief exactly. Just a quiet sense of closure. Marcus was being held accountable, finally, in a way that couldn't be negotiated away or spun into his favor. The truth was public record now. His cruelty was documented, and he would face real consequences for his actions. 3 weeks after the sentencing, Evelyn went into labor. It was fast and intense, the kind of delivery that medical professionals later said was probably accelerated by the stress of everything that had happened. But despite the difficulty, despite the pain and fear and uncertainty, Evelyn pushed through with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Hope Hart was born at 3:42 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, weighing 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with a head of dark hair and lungs that worked perfectly from her very first breath. When the nurse placed her in Evelyn's arms, still wet and crying, Evelyn looked down at her daughter's face and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. This was what survival had been for. Not just to escape Marcus, not just to heal from the trauma, not just to find safety with Caleb. All of it, every painful moment, every small victory, every step forward and occasional step back, had been leading here. To this tiny person who represented hope and future, and the possibility that good things could come from terrible experiences if you just refused to give up. Caleb stood beside the hospital bed, tears streaming down his face, one hand on Evelyn's shoulder and the other gently touching Hope's tiny fingers. The room was quiet except for the baby's soft sounds, the beeping of monitors, the hushed movements of medical staff, giving them space to meet their daughter. Outside that room, the world continued with all its complications and challenges. But inside, for this moment, there was only peace. 6 months later, Evelyn would write in her journal about what she'd learned. About how survival wasn't a single moment of dramatic rescue, but 1,000 small decisions to keep going when everything in you wanted to quit. About how healing wasn't linear, how some days were harder than others, even when you thought you'd moved past the worst of it. About how finding safe love after trauma felt terrifying at first, like waiting for the other shoe to drop, but eventually became the foundation for genuine peace. She didn't win by destroying Marcus, though his self-destruction had been spectacular and public. She won by surviving him, by refusing to let his abuse define her forever, by doing the hard work of therapy and healing and learning to trust again, by being brave enough to accept help when it was offered, to open her heart even when it felt impossibly risky, to believe that she deserved good things even after being told for years that she didn't. For the first time and longer than she could remember, Evelyn wasn't afraid of the future. She wasn't waiting for disaster, wasn't bracing for the next crisis, wasn't measuring her words to avoid triggering someone's anger. She was just living, fully and authentically, with a partner who respected her and a daughter who would grow up seeing what healthy love actually looked like. Marcus's letters from prison went unanswered, destroyed without being read. His attempts to contact her through third parties were documented and reported as restraining order violations. Evelyn built a life where he simply didn't exist anymore, not because she was pretending he'd never happened, but because she'd processed his impact and moved beyond it. He was part of her past, acknowledged but no longer powerful, a chapter that had ended definitively. On Hope's first birthday, Jennifer threw another party. This time, there were no surprises, no unwanted guests, just people who loved Evelyn and her family celebrating a year of life and growth and joy. Caleb grilled hamburgers while Hope toddled around the backyard, chasing bubbles and laughing with the pure, unself-conscious delight that only babies possessed. Evelyn watched her daughter, her husband, her friends, and felt gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She'd survived the storm. More than that, she'd built something beautiful in its aftermath. And that, Evelyn had learned, was the real victory. Not the dramatic confrontation or the courtroom justice or the public vindication, though all of those had mattered in their own ways. The real victory was simply being happy, being whole, being free. The woman who'd sat frozen in fear at her own baby shower was still part of Evelyn's story, would always be part of it. But she wasn't the whole story. She was just one chapter in a much longer narrative about strength, resilience, and the radical act of choosing yourself even when the world has tried to convince you that you're not worth choosing. If you've stayed with us through this entire story, we want to thank you. Stories like Evelyn's matter because they remind us that abuse can happen to anyone, that healing is possible, and that choosing yourself is never selfish. If this story resonated with you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories about survival, strength, and the human capacity for resilience. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts or your own experiences if you feel comfortable. Your voice matters, and your story deserves to be heard. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for believing that survivors deserve not just to escape, but to thrive.